What is up, everybody? It's the Vish Kumaran show. I'm joined here by my good buddy, 49ers Web Zone's own Rohan. He and I were supposed to do a dual stream where he sent me the link, but unfortunately, we were having some technical difficulties, so we had to call a quick audible and have some quick thinking and do the dual stream this way. Rohan, I'm really excited to have you. It's been a couple weeks since you and I have talked 49ers.
No, definitely. And I mean, it's coming at a good time. You know, the team just had a dominant victory, and it's a good amount to break down and a good amount to look forward to in week 2 as well.
Yeah, 100%. One thing I enjoy about streaming with you is my background's always a point of conversation in my streams. People always seem to say that I don't have enough decorations. I'm streaming in Raiders colors, this, that, yada, yada, yada.
Raiders colors.
It's nice to see that you have joined me in the blank wall dorm room background. Now, the difference between me and you is that I'm no longer in college, so I don't have an excuse for my wall background.
Apartment where we have moved in, and not much is not much is ready yet. So that is why the blank wall.
Whatever it is, I appreciate the fact that somebody else is willing to put their wall naked for all of America, or not America, for the few percentage of America that watches you and I stream. Somebody is willing to do that with me. So I appreciate you for doing that. Of course, I don't think anybody's here to listen to us talk about how blank our walls are, our lack of decorations. They're here for us to talk about Niners. So let's get into it. I just kind of want to, I know we're 2 days removed from the Pittsburgh game. I think a lot of people are still watching the highlights. I know I am. It was such an electric win. But kind of, I just wanted to get some of your brief thoughts on the game before we push past it. Maybe some thoughts on some of Shanahan's comments today, particularly on the corner position. A little bit of talk about Brock Purdy, a little bit of Brandon Aiyuk, Offensive Player of the Week, and then let's finish it up with some 49ers Rams. So let's start with the Steelers. What did you think of the game? Anything that stood out to you? Let's start there.
I think when you look at the Steelers in this game, I mean, the early dominance was really the most important takeaway. 49ers, a lot of people call them, second half team, both in games and in the regular season in general. So to see them, put out the way that they put out in this week, it was a pleasant sight. You talk about 5 3-and-outs, one of them being an interception. You talk about 4 consecutive scoring drives to begin the game. It's 20-0 to start this game. That's just a great way to start for the 49ers in this one. And I think that was, in my opinion, the most important takeaway. I honestly thought up until the last part of that drive, it was one of the cleanest halves we've seen Kyle Shanahan call and the 49ers execute in that first half. Now, second half, the gas pedal was taken off a little bit. Not as clean, but still a fine half, and they end up winning 30-7. But if the 49ers can start as fast as they can here, that's a huge benefit because they're already a strong team. But when you start that fast, you force the other team's hand, and that creates more missed opportunities and more aggressiveness, and that leads to, mistakes for the other team. And we saw a few of those from Kenny Pickett.
Yeah, I think the starting fast is such a good point, especially when you look at the 49ers. They're such a good team from playing ahead. When they're allowed to play from ahead, Shanahan kind of is able to dictate what defenses do because the run game is always an option. And when the run game's an option for the 49ers offense, it opens up play action and it opens up Shanahan's creativity with all the misdirection. And that's when they really make defenses work because they don't know what's coming and everybody looks the same. In turn, it also really helps the 49ers defense, which when they don't have to worry about the run while they're getting to the quarterback and they're just allowed to go get after the quarterback, they can close games and close games really fast. I think back to John Lynch in 2019 when they acquired Dee Ford. One of the things that they really said was that they really wanted to find guys that could close games. And if you looked at 2018 Dee Ford on the Chiefs, the one thing him and Chris Jones did for that football team, which was terrible on defense, was they closed games. And I think that that's what the 49ers acquired when they got Dee Ford. That's what they acquired when they drafted Nick Bosa. And ultimately, Rohan, I think that that's what ended up happening. That's what ends up happening when they're able to start quickly. They are so good from playing ahead. That I think that when they start fast and they're able to jump on teams, it turns into what the Steelers game turned into, because their defense is very, very hard to play catch up on unless your name is Patrick Mahomes. And their offense, when playing ahead, Shanahan's able to create so many different advantages where all really the quarterback has to do is execute. And if he does that, the 49ers offense is usually clicking on all cylinders.
No, I agree. And I mean, when you talk about, playing ahead and what it means for both sides, you saw how comfortable both sides are. And the good part is, at some point, the 49ers will make a mistake on one side or another. And in a way, when those minimal mistakes occur, they don't impact you as hard. Whereas sometimes, when we talked about last year with the 49ers, be it an issue with discipline or penalties or something, it used to be bad on top of bad on top of bad. And when you start behind, that's where it really starts to kill you. And that's where you start to dig yourself into a hole that you have to now climb out of. This way, if some of those plays start to spiral out of your favor, you still have a comfortable lead, and the 49ers still have good momentum going into that game. And so that's why, a game like this, it's not only resounding to see it in week 1, but it's also important that it came in a road environment where you're bringing Brock Purdy back for his first regular season matchup where, he's coming off somewhat of a pitch count the last 2 weeks. He comes into this game, looks totally fine. You're seeing all the elements click. And that's something we didn't necessarily see a lot of, especially at the beginning of the year, where you see everything click from the run game, from the run game, run blocking, to the pass game with Purdy connecting with the receivers. There wasn't drops, and you created those explosive plays both offensively and defensively.
So Shanahan's best friend Chris Sims actually had some insight onto this on PFT Live a couple days ago. I heard him talk about Shanahan week 1, and I've been one person that's really pointed out the history of Kyle Shanahan over 15 years as the play caller and how his offenses have historically not done well in week 1, unlike last week. And he said that Shanahan, unlike other coaches, doesn't like week 1 because he's unable to predict what defenses are doing to him. And what makes Shanahan so good is he's able to understand how defenses are trying to defend his offense, and then he's able to put them in precarious situations where they're unable to defend his offense. It's difficult to do that in week 1 when you're not 100% sure how the other team is going to play you. Why do I think that's really important when we look at the Steelers game? And I don't want to spend a lot more time there. I think it's important because we didn't see anything out of the realm of, hey, the Niners had this plan for this defense and they really, really screwed them up. They just ran their offense. They just played their defense, and they were just so clinical executing their offense from a standpoint of everybody was assignment sound outside of, well, maybe the right tackle a couple of times and the right guard a couple of times. But and then also everybody was assignment sound. And then also they were just so clinical that Shanahan didn't really call anything that really screwed up the Steelers. It was just, they called their offense and every play just worked. And it was a natural sequencing, and they demoralized the Steelers because it looked like the Steelers were getting what they were expecting and they couldn't stop it because the Niners were just so good at running their bread and butter offense. And that's a scary sight because as the weeks go on, Shanahan's going to really see how teams are defending them. And that's when we get away from, hey, this is who they are on offense. It will still be that because philosophically that's who they are, but we'll see a lot more game plan specific plays where they screw up a lot of defenses and create a lot of advantages. So to me, it's very dangerous that they look this good in week 1 when, they just kind of ran their offense. There wasn't I don't want to say there wasn't anything special because there was a lot of things special. They just didn't do anything out of the ordinary for themselves. Right. They just ran what they usually run, and there was no answer to it because they were so good at that. And that's scary, and that represents how good Purdy executed and then how good Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel, and Brandon Aiyuk are.
No, definitely. And I mean, I forget who said it. It was either Kyle Shanahan or Sean McVay. And I believe it was in the Play Callers podcast a while back. But they go into weeks thinking that their game plan, they go into weeks believing a team is going to play defense as they do. And because they believe, because of what they expect from a defense, they automatically assume that they can win based on what their game plan proves. It's not like the Steelers were completely abominable on defense or anything like that. They played the regular defense, but it's astounding to see how a team like the 49ers, understanding what an opposing team game plan is, especially Mike Tomlin's game plan, You're able to go there and you're able to execute just your regular offense and have it work to perfection like it did. I know Kyle Shanahan in the past, he's probably not been as happy with some of their execution efforts because when you don't, this is an effort where you saw, at least in the first half, the product go out as you want it. And when the product goes as you want it, the 49ers are scoring at will. It's just in the past, you haven't necessarily seen that. And that's why we go back to it and say, this is a great sign that it's clicking in week 1.
I agree. Let's put the Steelers game to bed. I think we've discussed that enough. Brandon Aiyuk just won Offensive Player of the Week. And I felt like we've had so many moments since Brandon Aiyuk's rookie season that we've just been waiting for him to explode. And it all felt a little premature because we were able to see the actual journey of the player the last 2 years. Go from the doghouse to slowly building his confidence back up. Then last year, we saw his confidence really, really grow and him get very consistent over the course of 17 games. And this year, it feels like his confidence matches what we all knew he had in terms of talent. And we're seeing a guy fully realize how good he is. And that confidence is now making him look like one of the 5 or 10 best receivers in football. Now he was rewarded with the NFC Offensive Player of the Week. He caught all 8 of his targets. He caught 2 touchdowns. He broke Patrick Peterson's ankles. He mossed Patrick Peterson. What do you think about Brandon Aiyuk's ascension? And what do you think of the Niners' weapons overall? Because to me, the Christian McCaffrey I saw week 1, if the Niners are the 1 seed, that's the guy that's going to win the MVP of football to me. And Deebo Samuel, I know that he was a 3rd option in that game because of how good Brandon Aiyuk and Christian McCaffrey looked, but I thought Deebo Samuel looked really, really, really good. So what did you think, obviously, about Aiyuk's ascension, and then what do you think of the Niners' weapons overall as we project how good this offense can be moving forward for the next 16 years?
The Aiyuk storyline has been definitely one to watch. And my main gripe coming out of last year with Brandon Aiyuk was, can he consistently make the big play? His route running is impeccable. That leads to wide open opportunities that he's easily able to convert. His hands are also pretty darn good. But when it came to the big play, sometimes, on those back shoulder throws that Garoppolo or Purdy even at times would throw to him where he'd have to contort his body, it's a very difficult catch, but you'd hope that he'd come down with. Sometimes he didn't. And that's why I was really excited when you saw the back shoulder throw on the go ball in the end zone to Patrick Peterson for that 2nd touchdown. Him being able to make that type of play, it showcases the big play potential that Brandon Aiyuk has. Now, it's going to require some more consistency, but he's slowly reaching into that upper echelon of receivers in the NFL and cementing himself as a guy who's going to get a good amount of money this offseason. Because when you have that complete package, especially in this offense where, he also has the will to block the way that he does, which is a perfect fit for not only the offense, but also the culture. I think you're finding a guy who has found his home here, but also is developing into a very, very strong receiver. And that's why people are starting to starting to believe that he might be better than Deebo Samuel as a true receiver. He might be that wide receiver 1. And I do want to say this as well, because I know when Trey Lance was moved, or really when Trey Lance, it was clear he wasn't going to win the job at all this offseason. Many were thinking Brandon Aiyuk may not have that year again, because you don't know what Brock Purdy is going to be able to do with a guy like Brandon Aiyuk, who many characterize as a deep threat. Brandon Aiyuk's not just a deep threat. He proves that he can win in multiple different ways: intermediate routes, crossing routes, slants, and also the deep ball. Brock Purdy's got the confidence to throw it. I think that's a good sign for him.
All right, so first, let's start with the last thing you said. The narrative that Trey Lance was somehow going to elevate Brandon Aiyuk, to me, was just bogus compared to Brock Purdy. I don't understand how a stronger arm makes Brandon Aiyuk a better receiver. Aiyuk's issues with not getting the ball had to do more with him and Jimmy Garoppolo just didn't seem to have the chemistry. But you saw, even at the end of last year, him and Brock Purdy had a different level of chemistry. With Aiyuk, it was more about operating on his timing rather than it was about, hey, the quarterback didn't have a strong enough arm to deliver him the ball, okay? I never understood that one. But to me, where Aiyuk has really, really gone to another level, you talked about the blocking. The blocking is unbelievable. I mean, this is a guy that's coming in and sealing the backside edge against defensive ends and doing stuff like that.
Right.
Like, he's really gritty. He wants to get it done. We saw the pancake of Levi Wallace, but there's two things to me that have really emerged, and to me, both are tied directly to his confidence. One, his confidence in general, right? Mentally, you can see Aiyuk really owns the fact that he thinks there's nobody that can guard him. I didn't get that vibe from him 2 or 3 years ago. In fact, I questioned if he would be a number one receiver, because to me, part of being a number one receiver is having that persona. And whatever you want to say about Deebo Samuel, he owns that persona every minute he's on the football field. You can feel Deebo's confidence, and you can feel how infectious that is. I mean, watch Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase. You feel that. You're feeling that now with Brandon Aiyuk. Like, you can feel Brandon Aiyuk's confidence is palpable off the TV screen. Nobody needs to know anything about football to see that number 11 really thinks he's that guy. And when receivers really think they're that guy, that's really dangerous, because that's half the battle, in my opinion. The other thing with Aiyuk is I think he's just gotten so comfortable in his athleticism, right? We always knew he had really oily hips where he could change direction without losing speed. Very, very smooth athlete in and out of his breaks. But to me, Aiyuk has become such a powerful and explosive and urgent mover now. The way he uses his fakes, they're not dramatic, they're not set up, but he sets up his routes. They're very, very efficient. And he's really, really strong at his spots. And he's really strong about getting to his spots. Nobody's going to move Brandon Aiyuk off of his spots. He runs his routes with great urgency to get where he needs to be on time and on schedule. And Shanahan talked about that with their landmarks. To me, it's not just him hitting his landmarks, but the urgency and power that he hits his landmarks with. You can trust throwing the ball anywhere to Brandon Aiyuk, because Brandon Aiyuk really owns his space. And that's something Deebo Samuel also does very, very well. But to me, that was maybe one thing that was missing from Aiyuk at times earlier in his career. And now that you have this confidence in the player, he's now had one big performance. I think all it's going to take, you let Brandon Aiyuk get another big game and another big game. If that confidence really goes, I think we're going to see a top 5 receiver in football this year. I really do. It's going to be the kind of season Deebo Samuel had in 2021, and I think Deebo is going to have a really good year. But for Aiyuk, it's just about, you let him get confident. You let him actually produce as much as he thinks he can. Oh my God, because everything that's been missing from Aiyuk is that he's just been an underdog his entire life. And now that he's getting off the ball, he's being stronger, he's playing with an urgency, and he really, really owns his space. And you can see him as an athlete be so confident. To me, it's just, if he gets a couple more games, it could be an explosion, like not unlike even anybody expected. It could be to the point where we're talking about 1,500, 1,600, 1,700 yards. And if you add that kind of receiver with Christian McCaffrey and Deebo in this offense, we're talking about a top 2 offense in football.
No, I mean, I agree. And that's the scary part. We're talking about Brandon Aiyuk, but then you have a guy who might be the team's offensive MVP in Christian McCaffrey, who, I mean, I think he had the most yards he's had in a 49er uniform with 152 on the ground. He's a guy who can create on his own. A 66-yard touchdown. It's plays like this. Essentially, when it comes to this 49ers offense, the way you execute is not only by having, play after play of routine crispness, not only with the receiver or with the running back, but it's also the ability to make these explosive plays. And you're now creating more opportunities with the way that these guys operate, on top of how Kyle Shanahan calls games, to create those explosive plays where you don't have to rely on 10, 15 play drives in order to score. That's why this 49ers offense is becoming more dominant. And that's why, even though Brock Purdy may have arm limitations, it's still good enough to where you can make sure that those explosive plays still come together and you can score 25, 30 points a game or even more.
Right. And Brock Purdy is showing us that a little higher level of execution than Jimmy Garoppolo, a little bit more efficiency, and this offense with these weapons and all of that is unstoppable. Jimmy Garoppolo in some ways played very, very well last year with Christian McCaffrey. He really did. But it did not ever look this easy, and it didn't ever operate with this efficiency. And that's just the higher level of Brock Purdy, one with his decision-making, processing, and poise. I think the game's a little slower for him than it is for Jimmy Garoppolo, which is kind of weird to say given how much more football in the NFL Jimmy Garoppolo has played. 2, his athleticism and his ability to not only be athletic and escape pressure, but he also has that creative knack to actually make plays off schedule. Not everybody has that, but he's able to create opportunities to create explosive plays by passing off schedule. which I think 2 really helps their offense. And then it's 3, he just creates space better than Jimmy Garoppolo. He uses his eyes a little bit better than Jimmy Garoppolo in terms of creating space to create yak opportunities. Sometimes he can be a little bit inaccurate with his ball placement, but because he creates higher margin of errors for his throws, it creates more space. And yeah, we're seeing that. To me, this is the way I didn't have a question about whether were going to be a top 5 offense. I thought they would be somewhere near there, but I didn't expect them to start this quickly. And now when they start this quickly, I think they can be a top 2 offense. And that to me is different.
That's exactly it. I do want to give a shout out though, because you did point it out at the beginning. We talk about Brandon Aiyuk. We talk about Christian McCaffrey. Deebo Samuel looks rejuvenated. He looks like you might not look at the numbers, 5 catches, 55 yards. Sure, that might be pedestrians, right? But Deebo Samuel
ridiculous catches too.
He looks pretty darn good right now. And I mean, having him as a tertiary option, and we didn't even talk about George Kittle, right? Having him as a tertiary option that could elevate to the top guy in certain weeks, or even, fill his role in different weeks. I mean, the way that he looks, I thought was pretty solid too.
Oh, 100%. Deebo looks like a guy that can carry the offense in weeks that they need him to carry the offense. Last week, they didn't need him to carry the offense, but there will be weeks that Deebo Samuel's skill set is what they need to carry them. And the fact that they have 3 different guys who've shown that they can carry the offense. And then, of course, George Kittle maybe isn't as good as he was 2 or 3 years ago, but he can still turn back the clock when he needs to and have a huge, huge game. So the fact that they have all of that and they have a quarterback who's actually operating the offense and doing all the real basic stuff at a high level, I mean, yeah, it's a scary sight, and the play caller is obviously unbelievable. And when he's that good and locked in, it's very, very difficult to stop this offense.
No, definitely. That's a lot of talk on the offense. Offense obviously flourished. The defense also did. I mean, you had 5 straight 3-and-outs. You had a turnover created early, another turnover created later. But there is one position where I think that there's a little bit of talk that we alluded to earlier, and that's cornerback. The 49ers have 2 strong cornerbacks, right? Charvarius Ward, they've trust Deommodore Lenoir. That third spot, though, had a little bit of fluctuation. Ambry Thomas was pulled, also was in the concussion protocol for a little bit. Talk to me about, that third cornerback spot. And I know you had reservations early prior to the season. Talk to me about that spot.
Yeah, so we talked about this, I think, maybe 2 weeks ago, so a week before the season. And I was always big on Deommodore Lenoir playing nickel. And then you go watch that game, and look, I haven't gotten through all the film. I've watched some of the 49ers defense. I'm going to do the rest of it probably like way later tonight. But I noticed Shanahan's comments. You pointed them out to me. I actually didn't read them until 5 minutes before the show, but I saw that he said basically, if you watch the film, you'll know what happened with Ambry Thomas. And I mean, even in the first half, there were a couple of missed assignments that I saw. Now I need to get through the rest of it, so I'm not going to pretend like I know exactly what the missed assignments were and why and everything like that. But I'm guessing that there's a couple more on why they brought in Isaiah Oliver, inserted him in the slot, and moved Deommodore Lenoir back outside. Overall, Oliver, to me, by the end of the game, played fine. Again, I'll go back and watch it. I will tonight, and maybe tomorrow when I come on with Jesse and Larry, I'll give you a much stronger opinion on how I thought those guys looked. I'm not a big Oliver guy, but I do think there's a question mark on this football team because I think there's only 2 really solid corners that they trust. And there's then a mismatch of guys who could perhaps play well in the right situation, in the right role, but there's nobody you can fully trust. And the Niners really have 2 options right now. They hope they go with Oliver or Thomas and they stick with them, and they hope that they really, really step up. Lenoir did that for them last year when they went with Lenoir, Mosley, and Ward. Lenoir played phenomenal. Or they just hope that nobody gets hurt and that their defensive line plays so well that they're able to cover up that other side corner or the slot corner because Lenoir and Ward are playing at a high level. It's not a great position to be in, but hey, when you're this good and you're this good of a team, you can have a situation where perhaps you have a question mark on the right side of your offensive line. Perhaps there's a corner spot that's not great, but definitely it's not something I'm fully committed to saying that. One, I didn't watch the full game, so I didn't watch the full game on film, so I don't want to make any premature comments, but two, and more importantly, it is a position that I've pointed out basically from the beginning of the offseason that, hey, I'm not sure what's going to happen here because I feel like the team only has two really competent players at corner.
And I do want to give you your props because there is I remember when we had our show during training camp, when I was there, we talked about the nickel position when we went through our positional breakdown, and I was just reporting what I had seen thus far. And what I had seen was that at the nickel position, there was only one player earning a lot of snaps, and that was Isaiah Oliver. Vish's prediction, though, was that Isaiah Oliver would not be the week one nickel corner. He was not that confident in Isaiah Oliver, obviously not having been there, but he was not that confident in Isaiah Oliver. Later that week, Steve Wilks and Kyle Shanahan revoke what they had said earlier in the offseason, say that the position is up for grabs, and then in the practices that weren't open to the media, you start seeing Deommodore Lenoir slide into the nickel. And right now, I think there's more so just battling who are their top three guys, because that's essentially where they're going to end up playing Lenoir. If they believe Oliver is just more consistent than Ambry Thomas, Lenoir is going to play on the outside because they trust him to play either spot. If they like Ambry Thomas, they obviously value Lenoir's ability on the inside and also believe he can take on the nickel responsibilities, because some of the nickel responsibilities, when you see in the first half that the 49ers were alluding to in terms of that dual nickel role, Lenoir took on a tight end on a red zone play where Talanoa Hufanga came out and knocked down or pretty much gave Pat Freiermuth the hit to the chest. Lenoir took on some of those plays. And I mean, he was going up against bigger receivers. He was going up against tight ends on certain plays in the nickel, and then obviously got booted out to the outside when Isaiah Oliver came back. And so I think Lenoir is capable of doing one role or the other, and his body at least can hold up in that nickel slot. But right now, I'm not a big fan of rotations in the game. I think that messes up chemistry, and it also puts a little more of an onus in terms of pressure on that certain player who's getting rotated in and out. But the 49ers do need to figure out who that third cornerback is sooner than later, because that's the side that, they're going to get targeted a lot more. I was surprised that wasn't as much early in the game.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you summed it up perfectly. There's only two guys they trust right now. And I think that that's more important than necessarily even decided with one of these guys becoming decidedly good. Because let's face it, Isaiah Oliver is kind of who he is. Ambry Thomas is kind of who he is. But if the Niners can trust one of those guys to do their job, then schematically there's things you can do to help them. And I think that's kind of what's concerning right now. It's not so much that, hey, they don't have the most talent at the position. It's that they don't have the greatest talent at the position, but they seem to only trust two guys right now. And the nice thing is they have 16 games to figure out who they trust there. But I think at some point we're going to have to hope that they have three corners they can trust. Now, there's always $41 million of cap space and a coming trade deadline. For all we criticize the 49ers for bad trades, bad this, bad that, they've been excellent at trading in the middle of the season. That's how they got Emmanuel Sanders, Jordan Willis. That was a good trade for a 7th-round pick. Charles Omenihu was a very good trade. So they've done Christian McCaffrey, of course. So they've done a very good job trading in the middle of the season. That could present itself to being an option. Now, I would probably have to look at the market before I tell you what names I would like or what's going on there. But worst case, that could present itself to be an option if one of these guys don't gain the trust of this coaching staff. And perhaps one will. It's only, 1 week into the season. By next week or week 3, they gave Isaiah Oliver some guaranteed money. Maybe he presents himself and shows that he's the nickelback that they believe they were getting when they signed him.
I do want to ask you a question. Yeah, I just realized. I do want to ask you a question, though, on the way the 49ers game plan. Do you think that their game plan should involve kind of be suited to that third guy to try and play to their strengths, understanding the trust they have in the other two corners, or they should continue to implement the similar game plan and see who fits best in what they currently are doing?
The thing is the Niners kind of do what they do on defense. And that's, I said it when Saleh replaced or DeMeco replaced Saleh. I said it when Wilks replaced DeMeco. Everybody was like, oh, they're going to blitz. Said the same thing when DeMeco replaced Saleh. Remember, they're going to blitz. They're going to blitz. They're going to blitz. They do what they do on defense. It's not Saleh's defense. Well, it is kind of Saleh's defense. It's kind of DeMeco's defense. It's kind of Steve Wilks' defense too, but it's envisioned by Kyle Shanahan, who's the one who made this wide 9 adjustment. Not Saleh, not D'Amico, not them. It's envisioned by John Lynch, who played in a similar scheme, or the parent scheme from where this scheme originated, in that Tampa 2 defense. And they were committed to a scheme and philosophy. So there's going to always remain same on defense with the Niners. They're going to rush 4, and they're going to play 3 deep and quarters behind it. That philosophy is always going to remain. I think it's less about, hey, this guy dictates a game plan. It's more about, can we trust this guy to execute what we do on defense? And if they can reach the point that they trust one of those guys, well, yeah.
No, I think that's, I think that's fair. And I mean, when you look at what the 49ers have done, you're right. They have their philosophy and see how they can integrate players into their philosophy. And that's where certain players fit better than others. And that's where, a guy like Ambry Thomas or even Samuel Womack, a name we haven't talked about, that's where the hope was, a little more this year, where while the 49ers created a very similar approach, maybe with a little more blitz heavy Steve Wilks that requires more man coverage, more press coverage, putting guys in some of their stronger suits. And I did notice a little bit, you saw a little more blitzing early on from Steve Wilks. I think that cooled off a little bit later on. And so I'm curious to see, maybe in a closer game, does the cooling off period in the blitzing in the second half kind of continue, or do they blitz at the same regularity, albeit in different looks, to try and confuse defenses? Or sorry,
I think it's interesting because they've always been aggressive on third down with both D'Amico and Saleh as well. And I think they will be. Maybe that's a little bit more diverse with Steve Wilks on how they do it, because he's maybe going to be less like D'Amico in the sim pressure game on third down and bring more linebacker blitzes and stuff like that, because that's the kind of stuff he's done in the past. So I do think there will be differences to the defense, but I doubt you're going to see them philosophically be like, for example, like the Fred Warner play. I don't think they were run blitzing, if I remember correctly. I'll have to go back and watch it, but it's just, he sees it and he goes and hits it, and he's fitting the run in that hole, and it's just a great play. But like, there's going to be plays that I don't know. I just feel like philosophically, when we look at their defense by the end of the year, they're going to be every bit as good as they've been. I wasn't sure if they would be that, just because of attrition for their defense. Fred Warner, everybody looks fresh, where they look like they're going to be that same defense once again, which is kind of wild. 5 straight years of a top 5 defense is unheard of consistency in production. And then, I think at the end of the day, there will be subtle differences that we'll notice that are specific to Wilks, just like there were specific differences with D'Amico to Saleh. But overall, we're going to see a lot of the philosophy be the exact same to me.
I do have one thing that we hadn't spoke about before.
Sure.
I want to talk about the pass rush. Nick Bosa alluded to this pass rush potentially being even better than the 2019 pass rush. We've now seen it through one game. There were some complaints, specifically around the depth and around that second defensive end spot this offseason. 5 sacks in week 1. Talk to me about the pass rush and what you feel will happen this season.
Yeah, I thought that was a nuts take. I'm sorry. The 2019 pass rush lost a lot of their depth to injury, but it was a special group. I mean, when you talk about Ford, Armstead, Buckner, and Nick Bosa, that's a special 4. And no disrespect, because I do think that they have a special 3 between Hargrave, Armstead, and Bosa. But I think it kind of stops there. They have decent depth, and that depth really played well versus the Steelers. I think they'll have a really good pass rush. Perhaps it's better than the last couple years, although I don't know. Arden Key and Charles Omenihu were 2 very, very good players that were underrated, who played very well in 2021 and 2022, respectively. I know Drake Jackson got the 3-sack game, and everybody's talking about that, but those 3 sacks were not like, hey, Drake Jackson just whipped a tackle and went around and got the sack. It showed more. It was more about the guys he was rushing with, and he did a good job rushing with them and rushing as a unit. And he did a very nice job not getting beyond the quarterback's depth and being able to peel off when the quarterback gets moved off of his spot. And he's very fast, and he was able to chase him down. But I don't know that I saw anything like exceptionally special yet from Drake Jackson as a pass rusher, though I've seen traits that he could eventually be a very, very top level pass rusher. So we'll see. But for me, it's a little premature to say that. D Ford was a multiple time Pro Bowler. DeForest Buckner was, I think, a second team All-Pro in 2018. He was a Pro Bowler. Eric Armstead was always highly underrated and has been an excellent player for a long time, and he was one even in 2019. And then Nick Bosa has been special from day one. And then you talk about the Ronnie Blairs and those type of guys, DJ Jones, that was on the 2019 defensive line. That was just a very, very special defensive line. And I think we can acknowledge this is a very good one without going there, because that was a, hey, the team had so much cap room. That was their opportunity with young players, and they put together one of the nastier defensive lines in recent memory. Like, it's one of the best defensive lines in NFL history when you look at top to bottom what it was when they started week 1 of 2019.
No, I think that defensive line certainly was amazing. And that's why every time that when we talk to about a 49ers defensive line, you look to replicate that. You look to replicate, those 4 down linemen where you felt really, really strong about them. You could limit the amount of blitzing that you had to do because you knew you could get home by rushing 4. I do think, though, I do want to give some praise, obviously, to the 2 interior guys. Nick Bosa had despite the 0 sacks, I don't think that truly matters. It still thought Nick Bosa, made his impact on the game. But the 2 interior guys, I thought, were pretty strong in their debut, together. I think that Mark Armstead, he led to the first Drake Jackson sack.
He was outstanding in that game, by the way. But he didn't record anything on the stat sheet, but he was dominant in the run game in terms of his power. And then the first sack, right? I didn't mean to interrupt you, but he basically runs over 2 guards. It's a double team. He runs him over. He moves Kenny Pickett off his spot, and then Drake Jackson does a nice job running him down.
If these guys are able to dominate the way they were, even with the rate that they were double teamed in terms of the big 3, it's going to be a pretty special group. We don't have to necessarily compare it to, the elite group of 2019, but I mean, it was a pretty strong performance. And again, you're going to, I think this last performance, it showed a good amount about the 49ers and their way to respond early, but also maybe showcase that the Steelers might not be as good, at least on paper or roster wise, than some might have indicated after their preseason kind of hype, things like that. But
I don't think that.
How so?
I don't think that. I don't think the Steelers are going to be a bad team this year. I think they'll look fine for the rest of their 16 games. They just ran into a buzzsaw, and I think that's what needs to be focused on. To me, it's not that, hey, we were all wrong, the Steelers suck. Maybe they do suck, but I don't believe that. I think it's just that the 49ers were really, really focused for a 10 a.m. start on the road cross-country in what was supposed to be a hostile environment, which is still, in my opinion, a hostile environment, even though Niners fans kind of took it over. And they were just a buzzsaw, and they're capable of doing that. When they do that, you saw what they did to a pretty good team. They demoralized them. And it's more special 49ers. It's more impact 49ers. It's more 49ers are ready to go to me than it is, hey, the Steelers weren't, to quote Denny Green, they weren't who, or to misquote Denny Green, they weren't who they thought they were. I think they are who we thought they were. The Niners didn't let them off the hook, though.
Now, here's what I'll say in the point that I was trying to make. Personally, I'm not as sold on their offense as some others might be. I think that their team itself and the way that they'll be coached will allow them to have a 500-esque season this year. But their offense, I'm not sure I'm as sold on their offensive line. They made the addition of Isaac Seumalo. I still think that it's somewhat of a shaky group, specifically on the edges, that it might not make Kenny Pickett as comfortable and have him make the growth that you kind of want him to in year 2. I don't know how confident I am in that and their offense, and that's where I'm pointing to. But nonetheless, I think the 49ers had a very dominant performance in week 1, and you couldn't really ask of much more from them. I think there's improvements, don't get me wrong, but this is what you wanted to see when you watched week 1.
I agree with that. It's not that I think they're going to be an exceptional offensive team either, but I don't think they're a bad team.
Bad team.
I don't think they're going to have, I think they're going to play a lot. For example, the Rams next week. If you want to go there, I think the Niners are going to, once again, dismantle the Rams. And I think what the Rams showed week 1 is that they're exceptionally well coached still. McVay and Raheem Morris both still always have right game plans on how they're going to stop teams. McVay does a really, really good job managing the game. And against teams that aren't as talented as the 49ers and as well coached as the 49ers, the Seahawks are good, but they're not that supreme talent where they just have superstars everywhere. Between the coaching and between how good Matthew Stafford is, the Rams are going to have a chance. But against the Niners, when you add the fact that their team speed is as good as the Rams, they're bigger and stronger than the Rams. and they're as well coached as the Rams on both sides as well, to me, they're just going to dismantle them because the talent discrepancy is going to be way too large. And I think it's a similar story with the Steelers. Like, I think the Rams showed week one with a healthy Matthew Stafford, they can compete with a lot of the marginal teams in the NFC and perhaps put themselves in the playoff spot conversation and contention simply on the fact that they have Matthew Stafford and Aaron Donald and they're really well coached. But against the top level teams like the Niners with that high end talent, I think the talent discrepancy will be too far. As long as the Niners are wired in the way they were against the Steelers, to me, it should look pretty similar because they are way bigger. They're bigger than the Rams. They're faster than the Rams. They're much more talented than the Rams. They have better football players just about everywhere. And to me, it's kind of that situation where Stafford can make a lot of really, really high level throws into tight windows with a little bit of time in the pocket. But I don't think he's going to have any time in the pocket. And I don't think that they're going to have even the tight windows that he had against the Seahawks. I think there's going to be nothing available for him. And it's just going to be that kind of game because the Rams are just overmatched in terms of talent right now versus the 49ers.
I mean, I fired a tweet earlier today just looking at the odds. The 49ers are 8.5-point favorites against the Rams. I think that's the second or third highest deficit just because Buffalo is facing Vegas. That's pretty high. And then Dallas is facing the Jets. But 8.5-point favorites against a team that won 30-13 just shows you how well the 49ers are perceived and how, I mean, it's odds. But overall, this is a team that is going on the road, again, at Levi South, but to, in an environment where they are facing a team that just came off a 17-point win and they're favored by 8.5. I think that the 49ers right now with their roster, it works well against the Rams. They also have the Rams number. And I mean, if I were to place a bet, it probably would be to cover, and that's saying something given how wide the spread is against a team that just won.
Yeah, the Rams team speed and how well they're coached gives a lot of teams problems. The issue is the 49ers are just as fast. They're just as well coached. They're bigger and they have more talent. Like, I think that, in other years, perhaps this rivalry, although the Niners have owned it, has been maybe closer than people want to admit. Yeah, the Niners have blown them out a few times, but they've also won some very, very close games. And the Rams won a close one in the NFC Championship game. But I think the talent discrepancy has gotten too far between these two teams. And I can't imagine, as good as Stafford played, because Stafford really was unbelievable versus Seattle. McVay really is an awesome coach. I think they can do that against a lot of different teams. But in this case, I think it's just a far too big talent discrepancy to overcome. I think if the Niners lose, they beat themselves, which has been a common theme the last couple of years when the Niners do lose. But this team does look different because they were different week one than they've ever been. And so I'm going to pretend that this consistency is going to remain. And I do expect them to go do exactly what they did to the Steelers, to the Rams.
I do want to talk about probably the biggest matchup for the 49ers altogether. Kyle Shanahan knows it, and they've known it for a couple of years now. Aaron Donald versus that right side of the offensive line. Mm-hmm. Right side faced a couple of issues in week one. And something that I was just curious because I was watching a bit of that Rams game prior to the 49ers game, and after the 49ers game, and I saw Aaron Donald in his alignments sometimes lining up out.
They'll line him up on the edge. They'll line him up on the edge for sure. He'll line up over Colton McKivitz for sure.
And I mean, I wanted to look at the stats. I mean, and Aaron Donald lined up over the tackle on 24 of his 41 reps. That he has a defensive lineman in this game. And then one was outside of the tackles. So he had, 25, around 62% of his reps were over the tackle. Want to get your thoughts on that matchup, especially because they try and, align them.
They're going to move them around everywhere, but I think the Niners plan is going to be what it's always been. They're going to try to avoid obvious drop back pass situations. The Rams have an advantage even with their talent discrepancy if they get into situations where they get the Niners to 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9. For most teams, that's a defensive advantage because you can rush 4, you can play zone behind it. You can hopefully get to the passer, especially because most teams don't have strong pass blocking offensive lines. So that's a good situation for a lot of teams, right? I just think that we've seen the game plan. The Niners try to avoid that. Jimmy Garoppolo has been very efficient versus this football team the last 2 years. They are 4-0 in the regular season, and they don't do it throwing the ball 35, 40 times. They do it with a very balanced attack, using misdirection, and then Deebo Samuel dominates. Christian McCaffrey dominated last year, and I expect that to happen. If the Niners do get into a situation where Aaron Donald's on Colton McKivitz and he's getting a good look at him and he's getting a good look at him at third down, well, that's going to be a problem. I originally thought McKivitz had a lot stronger game than he had when I went back and watched the film. Like, I thought it was really just a few plays that TJ Watt got him, but there were some missed assignments in the run game and stuff like
Run
that.
game,
I hope
yeah.
he plays better next week, but surely that's a very, very difficult matchup for anyone, let alone Colton McKivitz, because Aaron Donald's one of the greatest players ever.
Yeah, I mean, you're right in that case. And we pointed at it earlier when we talked about Deebo Samuel. There's certain games where the 49ers will rely on Deebo Samuel. And these Rams games have always been one of those, where they try and amp up the physicality, take it to their division rivals, especially, when Jalen Ramsey was back on the team.
Deebo
things like
bullies
that.
them.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there's no Ramsey to bully anymore, but I wouldn't be surprised if the 49ers go ahead and call Deebo Samuel's number again, on a number of occasions, be it screens, be it runs out of the backfield, be it in the variety of ways that they like to use him, potentially see his volume see an increase in this type of game where they're trying to wear down their opponent.
Perhaps. Maybe they won't even get there. Because, again, we saw week one how efficient just the Bear, like, it just looks so efficient with how they got the ball to him, how they got the ball to Aiyuk, how they got the ball to CMC. Like, Deebo had a quieter game because he never got a big play in that game, while the other two had a couple more big plays. But the way they were able to distribute the ball between the three was very, very effortless and seamless. It felt like all three of them felt a big part of the game. It would be CMC, Deebo, Aiyuk, CMC, Deebo, Aiyuk. And so I think it could be a similar kind of thing, just when you look at how much more talented they are than the Rams, where, again, if things work and flow and Brock Purdy is playing the way he was versus the Steelers, again, yeah, I think they should just walk all over him, and it shouldn't look difficult, and it shouldn't look like, oh, they're relying on Deebo, they're relying on CMC, they're relying on Aiyuk. It's just a natural flow of all three getting involved. And I think the final stats will be based on who gets the bigger plays, not necessarily who gets more targets, because I think they're all going to be around the same realm. Obviously, CMC will get the most touches, but I think they'll all be in the same, or Deebo and Aiyuk will be in the same realm of 8 to 10 targets.
No, I think I agree with that. And I mean, if the 49ers can execute the way that they did last week, if it's a sustainable formula, that's an issue. That is a big issue, because then any talk you have about quarterbacks kind of goes out the window if they're able to have that level of sustainable offense.
Yeah, to me, I mean, we have to get to week 5 before I really think a team can really affect the sustainable offense, because Dallas's defense, to me, has a lot of favorable matchups versus this offense. Like, they actually have a chance. They have the team speed. They have the physicality to really give this offense issues, and that's because they have an excellent defense. But in the next few weeks, as long as the Niners execute, which is something we've said about this football team in the past, and they've kind of beat themselves, but as long as they do what they're supposed to do, and clearly there's something different about this team because they did what they're supposed to do week 1, which they haven't done in the past. I do think that, it should look pretty easy and clinical because they're just that much more talented.
I agree.
What do you think, Rohan? You got anything more to say about the upcoming game? Anything you got going on? Anything that you've seen the last couple of weeks that you want to talk about? What's up with you?
I mean, I'm glad that we can start watching film again. This was the first film review. I did mine. I just looked back at it yesterday. Glad you can you start getting back into the NFL groove, because it's been preseasons there, but this is the first kind of real groove into it. And I'm glad that Nick Bosa signed his contract, because I did say that the Steelers were going to win, and then flipped it because I said if Nick Bosa signs, it's going to be a 49ers victory. So I'm glad that, that happened. Otherwise, would have been having to look back on myself, because I think the 49ers easily win that game without Bosa as well.
Oh, I agree. And to me, it's crazy because they were able to kind of get him the perfect first game back to integrate him. He played a lot of snaps, but there was a lot of gaps between the snaps because of the 5 straight 3-and-outs. He was able to get back into the groove of things, but they also were able to kind of taper him back through the end of the game because they were up by so much. It was kind of the perfect setup. And I think we all know that that's one of the best players in the NFL, and I think that he's going to be ready to go, and we're going to see 16 and awesome games from him. I couldn't believe some of the commentary before he got paid. Like, people were pretending like Nick Bosa isn't like arguably the best defensive player in the sport of football and all of that, and that he didn't deserve to be the highest paid players. He absolutely deserved every penny he got. And I think that he will completely reflect that over the next 16 games. Yeah, that discourse was wild to me. That was some of the craziest stuff this offseason. And we've had a crazy offseason before we got here.
Anytime we see trade talk, anytime we see that kind of thing, where impatience comes around extensions, that seems to be the case.
This is funny. Gurman Pata says, I'm your interior designer. Yeah. I respect it, Rohan. It takes a real man to show a naked wall to the camera.
Hey, this is what real fans are going to have to be accustomed to this for a little
let me
bit.
amend that. Real person, not real man. Real person. Base Spokane Niner fan says, Cowboys are being crowned as the most impressive win last weekend. If Kyle doesn't go conservative, do we have the most impressive win? I'm going to let you go, but I disagree with the Cowboys being the most impressive win. Go ahead.
Most impressive win. I mean, it depends on the way that you look at it, right? I'm going to say this. I do believe that the Niners had the most, well, maybe, I don't know if you'll call it the most impressive win because of this, the way the second half wasn't as dominant as the first half, but I mean, the way that it was executed, this was one of the most beautiful games that you could have watched in the first half, at least. And then throughout the game, I mean, the 49ers still, like, people think that they slowed down in the second half. They didn't allow a single point in the second half. Like, the Steelers scored their 7 points right in that. Maybe that one drive is the one where you can nitpick. Apart from that, they scored 0 points. I know they got to the end zone a couple of times, but the 49ers, I mean, I still value that short, those short distance situations where you're able to shut them down on fourth downs. I value that still. And I thought that this was a pretty impressive win.
Come on. To me, okay, so there's two things. One, I'll say this. I'm a homer. I'm a 49ers fan. Obviously, everybody knows that. But I try to be mostly objective and be fair. The Niners offense looked way better than Dallas's offense in that game. And they were going up against a much better defense than Dallas's offense. Two, the only reason people think Dallas's was the most impressive win is because they're obsessed with putting NFC East games as Sunday Night Football to start week 1. We had no business watching that trash game as the Sunday night game, but they needed to put Dallas on Sunday Night Football. And because Dallas beat the Giants, you got to say Dallas had the most impressive win. Dallas looked really good. Dallas's defense is really good. I picked Dallas to win the NFC East this year. I'm pretty confident about that pick. But to me, what the Niners did going to Pittsburgh, early start, West Coast team going East Coast, tougher place to play than Giants Stadium. I think Pittsburgh is a better team than the Giants too. And the fact that they went in there and blew them out and their offense did what their offense did and their defense did what their defense did. Yeah, Dallas had a good win, but to me, it's not even close. The Niners were clinical in every aspect except their kickoff coverage. They had by far, to me, the most impressive win of week 1. And again, I'm trying not to be a homer here, but this one to me is egregious. It's all about that star, man. They want to promote the star and all of that. It's unbelievable.
You see, I was conservative. I just sent you up the alley-oop for the slam dunk. You can go ahead and take that one home. But I mean, I do think the 49ers had the most impressive win.
Yeah, I was surprised because I thought Dallas's offense would look a little more efficient.
A little better? Mm-hmm.
They ran the ball fine. Like Brian Schottenheimer, Mike McCarthy, they managed the game better than they get credit for, and they're better coaches than they get credit for. McCarthy especially. Like, yeah, his flaws get exacerbated, but you look at his overall record. You don't have that kind of success in the NFL without being good at what you do. I'm sorry. But the Niners offense looked a lot more clinical, a lot scarier, a lot more explosive than Dallas's offense. And the Niners defense looked every bit as good as Dallas's defense, let alone the fact that it wasn't a divisional opponent that you get pent up for. You had to go cross country against a very well-coached, disciplined team in Mike Tomlin's Pittsburgh Steelers, and you did what they did. Sorry, Dallas. You don't get the most impressive win just because they put you on Sunday Night Football. Gosh. At least they didn't put Bears-Packers on Sunday Night Football, though. I'll tell you that. They usually do that week 1. That one's unbelievable.
That one was not a great one. We'll say that.
You out on Justin Fields yet?
I mean, that offensive system is not great. Justin Fields did not have a good game. There's a lot there. I'll say this, though. I mean, Justin Fields, you got 16 more games. Otherwise, you're done. You're done in Chicago, because if they don't make much traction this year, I think if they go under 500 even, and there's a chance that they can go ahead and select a quarterback, maybe not even with their own pick, but
Or
maybe
trade up.
Carolina's, or trade up, because they're going to have 2 first-round picks. They're going to take that opportunity, because Ryan Poles needs to amp it up after, the way that the last few off seasons have gone.
I agree. I was a Justin Fields fan coming out of college, and ever since I've
I
seen
was
him in
too.
the NFL, I've become progressively less of a fan. We hit rock bottom watching that week 1 game. There's issues with their offensive system, but their
Not
offensive
pretty.
system feels like they're calling plays for a quarterback that they have absolutely no faith in. And I think their issues stem from there. And you're right. He's got 16 games to turn it around. I guess it's stupid to write him off after week 1, but things are looking ominously bad there, like really, really bad.
Yeah, I mean, that would easily, if I were to be a Bears beat writer, easily would have been an F in terms of performance for Justin Fields in week 1, unfortunately.
Yeah, try an F-. It's not
Yeah.
just the throws he missed and all of that. Did you like Darnell Mooney, Chase Claypool, and he's got to pay for their cryotherapy for the next couple of days, and the fact that they got to recover after all the hits he threw them into. Our boy Jimmy G was doing that too on Sunday a little bit to Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers. Now, not the Kareem Jackson hit. That was a little bit bang bang. He did throw him low and kind of away from it, but he did throw them into some licks in that game.
Hey, Jimmy G got to win at least. Jimmy G got to win.
He got a fourth quarter comeback too. Did you see how he threw the red zone pick at the end of the third quarter so that he can get the fourth quarter comeback?
I had NFL Red Zone up. They were showing that game, and then we saw the fourth quarter scramble. And that was
a clutch scramble. That was good stuff from him. That was a clutch scramble. Yeah,
add up those fourth quarter comebacks. That's what Jimmy G does.
All he does is win.
It's still continuing.
Oh, 100%. Anybody else that stood out to you week 1?
I mean, there were a couple of performances. I mean, a lot of people obviously discourse on Josh Allen. Two of that game was fun. I actually watched a lot because I have Tua and Tyreek Hill on my fantasy team.
Oh, lucky you!
In my college league, so I was
talked
pretty
a lot
excited.
Of crap to the buddies.
Yeah, because someone traded me Tyreek Hill, and he's my roommate. So,
what's your fantasy team name?
Well, I got 2 of them. One is IR squad because my team was fully injured last year, and then the second one is AR-15 QB1 because I drafted Anthony Richardson, and then Tua was going to back him up. I'm going to have to change that because I traded for Tyreek Hill and started Tua, and clearly that's a solid one.
Yeah, I agree. That's funny. I will say, as I'm a known Tua hater, I've been a Tua detractor, a Tua doubter. Tua looked unbelievable. I
really
need to.
That was probably
my
his best
hate.
Yeah.
I agree. I need to just remove. I was wrong on Tua. Sorry, Tua. I was a hater. I was wrong. I take my L. You were right. Yeah, it's tough, but he looked good. Mike McDaniel looks good. Their defense, Fangio with some nice schemed up clutch blitzes. That was nice. Sean Tuber says, I thought the same thing, man. I thought they should have taken Fields. So, but you know what? Fields, and I've said this, regardless of what went wrong with Lance or whatever, Fields would have been the wrong pick too in so many ways. And I've been saying this just about since he's been drafted. To me, of the 3 available, the most correct pick was Mac Jones. And did they really miss out by not picking Mac Jones? I think some people would say they didn't. I think Mac Jones is a nice quarterback. I also think Purdy's a nice quarterback, but I also like Purdy. Like, as a fan, I can root for Purdy a lot more than I can for Mac Jones, and is kind of just the fact that he throws those sideline tantrums is kind of off-putting as just a pure fan.
Yeah, I mean, the 49ers, quarterback is going to always be a discussion, but you can't say too many are going to complain right now with Brock Purdy as their guy over.
Yeah, and his athleticism. I mean, Brock Purdy's movement, they're going to call it underrated athleticism every year. It's real athleticism. His movement causes problems. I mean, he's shaking Minkah Fitzpatrick out of his shoes. And I think, you know, the Steelers defense isn't exactly slow. They're not the fastest defense, but they're not slow. They look slow trying to run down Brock Purdy. His speed
Right.
and quickness gave them problems. And I think the only defense that we're going to see with the team speed to actually run this guy down and give that Niners problems is Dallas. Dallas is the only team with the athletic enough defensive line to run this guy down. And the creativity he has outside of the pocket, one of my biggest pet peeves is that creativity and off-structure plays are automatically assigned to quarterbacks who have the quote-unquote traits to deliver them. So if you're big arm and athletic, people immediately attribute that to the fact that you're going to make plays off schedule. I think there's an innate skill and creativity to actually make plays off schedule. I don't think that that's I think that's its own trait. That's not about the physical, tangible gifts you have. To me, Justin Fields is a great primary example. Jalen Hurts as well. They're terrible at creating opportunities to throw off structure. Jalen Hurts' EPA per play is not very good when he's outside of the pocket and has to throw the football. Justin Fields is very good at creating space to run when he gets outside of the pocket, but he's not very creative in terms of being able to create throws when he gets outside of structure. Right. Brock Purdy is able to do that with lesser than physical traits. I think it's somewhat of a special skill because he just has a playmaking knack and instinct. It is a little bit of an it quality, but it's an instinct nonetheless to make the correct football play. And then, of course, he has unbelievable football awareness. And so I think those are the skills that really just are separating him and allowing him to thrive the way he is at the level he is at thriving at right now.
No, I agree. And I think, this is why I said there's still room to improve for Purdy. A lot of people, shut that down. I think that all the things that he had last year can still be improved upon. Eye manipulation, accuracy on some of those in breaking routes over the middle, those kind of things. I think there's still room for improvement, and he's already whatever you want to call him. I mean, you can debate whatever his ceiling may be, but it's cool to see some of the things that he put in week one. And I mean, I think that's the start of what could be a pretty solid season barring injury.
Yeah, I think the ceiling conversation after a while, it's tired. Like, how good is he really? It's tired. What is he doing for their offense? Is he doing the right things? Is he not doing the right things? That's the questions that we should be talking about as Niners content creators. Okay, how does he stack up with the rest of the NFL? How does he stack up versus this game and this game versus that guy? Like, we don't know that. They're going to play the football games and we're going to find out. But let's take a look at week one. Did he do his job for this football team? And he absolutely did. Are there moments last year where he didn't do his job? Surely. But there were a lot of other moments that he did do his job at a high level. And right now, at this moment, there's nothing to complain about with what he did week one. He just does the basic necessity things at a very high level. His confidence, his poise, those kinds of things also, I don't think get enough credit because then we're getting to intangible things that are very hard for us to quantify or project. But clearly there's a quality that rubs off on his teammates and stuff like that. And he did an excellent job week one. And as long as he does that with consistency, I don't think there's much of a reason to have a conversation about is he good enough or is he this or is he that? Because he's playing with all of these weapons, and as long as he's doing his job with these weapons, it frankly shouldn't matter. We only talked about it with Garoppolo because he didn't do his job in the highest leverage moments. He would execute as the quarterback of this football team. And if Purdy does that, we'll probably talk about it too. But if he doesn't, it doesn't matter if he's better than this guy or if he's better than that guy or if he's better than this guy, because the Niners don't necessarily need the same thing that every other team needs at quarterback.
No, I think so too. And I mean, that's where I like your characterization of it. Don't try and relatively compare quarterbacks in different areas that it's tough to compare. And really, it's just setting up for negative discourse. The way that you should do it, and I'm not trying to limit anybody to a system quarterback, but how well do you truly operate in the role that you're expected to do? And of course, quarterbacks are going to get bumped up for their ability to do more than what they're expected to do. And you can argue Purdy does that with the way that he's creative, with the way that he makes off-schedule plays on top of what he's expected to do. But the reason that you don't necessarily see as much of that compared to other quarterbacks is because what he's expected to do is capable of being done within the pocket. And it's capable of being done early on.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Titus Buller asks, what did I think of Burrow getting bottled up? I saw half the game, but it's hard to watch for me to watch other games when I'm watching Niners games. And it looked like Cleveland's pass rush, the wet conditions, it looked like a crappy game for offense in general. I plan to watch that game sometime before next week, so maybe I can give you a better characterization before then. I'll be on with Larry and Jesse right here tomorrow. Make sure you tune in for that. And then what did I think of Cam Akers' stat line? I think that's the worst take I've ever had, that Cam Akers at one point was better than Elijah Mitchell. Cam Akers is not that guy. There's a lot of issues with Cam Akers. Kyren Williams is the back to me that looked a lot better on the Rams. And yeah, that's just what I think of it. Pretty disgusted about it. Pretty disgusted that I ever had a lot of faith in Cam Akers. But hey, when you swing on guys with physical traits, sometimes they do what Cam Akers is doing.
I mean, when I read that stat line on ESPN Fantasy app,
it's gross.
I had to go back and really see what the hell happened.
My buddy was praying he would score one of those touchdowns, man, because he was about to be a net negative in fantasy with opportunity.
29 yards on 22 carries is, you can make whatever argument you want on the offensive line. That is pretty darn gross. Pretty bad.
The offensive line isn't good, man, but Kyren Williams didn't look that bad.
No. And he had himself a pretty good game. I mean, there was talk, he could be, the third down guy, or he could be having whatever role, but he looked pretty solid. And there was
talk last year that McVay loved him.
Yeah, that's true. When he had an injury, I believe, that sidelined him at the beginning of the year, whereas that's why he had a slower start to the year, that kind of thing.
Yeah, for me anyway, the Rams offense, I did watch that game. That was the first game I watched on Monday. I watched it live, and then I watched the All-22. Wow, Stafford played. Like, that was one of the better just performances purely from a quarterback with what he had around him and the throws he made. It was one of, I'm a Stafford fan, but that was an unbelievable performance. But outside of that, I don't know what about the Rams is going to challenge the Niners. I'm really serious. Maybe Stafford makes a few wow throws, but they're going to be so overmatched in every aspect. The receivers aren't good.
Even when it comes to Stafford, right? The 49ers have found a way to game plan around, his strengths and find a way to bottle that up by also
make difficult throws, man.
Yeah.
They make him make difficult throws from tight pockets and stuff like that. In the NFC Championship game, he did do that after they were down 10. Like, everybody talks about the Tart play. The whole shot he hits versus cover 2 to Odell Beckham, the very, very next play after the Tart play, far hash hole shot, cover 2 hole shot, that Jimmy Ward gets called for a 15-yard penalty added onto it, is a ridiculous throw from a tight pocket. And he makes a bunch of those later in that game. But that was with Cooper Kupp there. That was with a little better offensive line. They had Odell Beckham, who was very good at beating man coverage at the time. Their defense was a lot better. That was a different football team. Stafford's fully capable, but it's just one of those things where he's going to go against a buzzsaw defense with basically nothing around him. And yeah.
You got a score prediction before we head on out?
I hate doing this because I jinx the 49ers every time I pick them to win big. I think that I fully admitted that was part of my thinking in picking the Steelers, because then when I get really, really stuck in on they're going to lose, they also win. When I stay fairly neutral, then I don't really get wrapped into what ends up happening. Like, when I pick them to win big and they lose, it's extra devastating. The Bears game last year was like that. And then when I pick them to lose and they win, it's extra satisfying, because it's like, yes, I doubted them, and then that adrenaline of like, they even proved me wrong is like such a good thrill as a fan. But I'll give you like 30-7, similar kind of thing, 27-7.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just don't know how the Rams are going to score in this football game, man, unless the Niners just turn it over and fall apart and sit down and do that. Like, what are the Rams going to do on offense?
We're gonna have to see. We're gonna have to see on Sunday. That's my answer to that.
That is the correct answer, everybody. That's Rohan Chakravarthi. You can find him on 49ers Web Zone and on YouTube at Rohan Chakravarthi. Thank you for joining us. This was really, really fun. I will be back tomorrow streaming with the great Larry Krueger and Jesse Naylor. We will be streaming at 8:30 Central, 9:30 Eastern, 7:30 Pacific. We will be streaming during the Thursday night game. If you want to chill with us talking Niners, Rams, all of that stuff while you're watching Eagles, Vikings, please do so. I will be back tomorrow. Rohan, thank you so much, and we'll see you guys next time.